Ready to go?
All right, well, welcome everybody. Congratulations for being up and awake in here Sunday morning. We appreciate you coming. Being sober Saturday night really sucks, but here we all are.
Yeah. And welcome to our talk on ham radio for hackers. We're going to go over why ham radio is still relevant in this day and age. It's not just a bunch of old geezers that are sitting there talking on the radio. Personally, I really don't like talking to strangers, which kind of makes this a little weird. But ham radio and the fundamentals you learn with it, they are super, super relevant to the hacker world.
So one thing I want to do is give a shout out to both the 303 and the 719 crew. They're kind of how we got into this whole thing, especially our friend Nick, who was the person that we wrote this entire talk for. He kept asking us questions about RF.
Third time.
Yeah, this is the third time he's missed it. So Nick, when you see this, you should be here. Anyway, we're writing all this so that we can answer questions for our hacker friends about what ham radio has for them. And so everyone always says, hey, what's up with these old boat anchors, the little green radios, and now we got all these little SDRs. Like, how do we meet in the middle? What do we do with all the old technology, and how do we bring that into this era?
And you can see our call signs there. I'm N7HKR, and he's KRover. You can get some vanity call signs, but if you get your license, you're going to get a call sign. And that call sign is actually pretty trackable. If you go in and start looking, there's FCC databases, and hams are nerds, so there's lots of other databases that pull on all that information. And those call signs will track back to your address, so there's not a lot of anonymity there. Things are pretty public. It takes kind of some of the open source ethos to the next level where everything has to be out there legally.
So one other thing I think we should bring up is that we're from Colorado. This is Devin's backyard, and this is my daughter down here. One of the things we like to do when we're doing radio contesting is see how much we can hack the contest. So one thing we learned is that old white guys like to talk to women. So as soon as you get into a radio contest, get your younger or significant other on the radio, and all of a sudden you will have a pile-up, which is a large group of people that want to talk to you. All right, so when we talk about which one of these things looks like the other, this is what ham radio nerds look like. I mentioned contesting. Mobile contesting is what I got into pretty quickly. VHF and up. So you can see our rover over there on the far left. There's 12 bands on that rig. And then we drove out to the middle of nowhere, somewhere between Kansas and Colorado, and set up there and operated for a weekend.
And this is what hacker nerds look like. This is our war driving rig, and that's my wife's car. Yes, it's looked like that, and she's fine with it. And I think this last year we managed to log over 80,000 SSIDs in under 2 hours with that rig. Second place was about 30,000. So knowing the principles of RF, you can tailor some of your gear to do certain things and behave in certain ways that will give you an advantage. And yes, the officer there was really interested in what we were doing.
So a lot of the questions that you might ask as you're on a social engineering or walking around DEF CON and explaining to yourself to officers, you do a lot of social engineering there to try and get yourself out of a ticket. No, we're not doing anything wrong. Yes, we have a license. Yes, we are receive only. So you get pretty good at PR with the public.
And the amount of strange looks that you get when you're driving around with that on the roof, you just start ignoring them at some point. It's kind of entertaining for a little bit, though. So, what is amateur radio? You can read that if you want. key points. It's non-commercial. You can't do any, commercial activity on there. Yes, you can run TCP on ham bands, but all of the internet runs on ads and commercial portals, so you can't really connect it to the internet just because of the non-commercial aspect. You can't sell stuff. There's a little bit of leeway for selling some of your ham gear on there, but you'll get called out really quick if you start trying to use your ham stuff in any commercial way, and then it all tracks back. You've got the license. You have to announce your call sign every 10 minutes, so people can come and find you if you're doing naughty things. Wireless experimentation. Back in the day, that meant messing around with ham radios and trying to get the furthest contacts and things like that. These days, it's dicking around with SDR, analyzing protocols, and things like that. So it's really evolved. The same basic RF, but we're just using it in a much more modern fashion.
Yeah, so back in the day, you would use this to chat with people that were on the other side of the country, or world in this case. And so you could get on HF and talk to people that were on the other side of the globe. So this was the original IRC. But like Devin said, now with so much wireless experimentation going on with like the RTL-SDRs, a lot of the development is happening in places like GitHub. And so when I want to find something new to do with an RTL-SDR, you get on GitHub and you start working with other people that know more about that chipset than you do, and you just build off of it.
Yep, and everything's wireless. Everything. How many people here have a wireless device on them? Yeah. How many have multiple wireless devices? It's all RF. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, Zigbee, Z-Wave. The 433 megahertz transmitters, kilohertz transmitters, and the TPM, the tire pressure sensors in your car, the little cordless weather stations. It's all out there.
Yeah. So what is amateur radio really to hackers? So we'll have people chat with us and they'll say, why should I bother to do this? The number one reason is that if you buy a hack RF or an RTL-SDR or something that can actually transmit, then the question is, how long am I going to be able to stay legal? And unless you're operating in a Faraday cage, and we'll talk about those later, the one thing that getting your amateur radio license gets you is the ability to transmit legally. The other thing is that you have a legitimate transmission, and the question becomes, what's the difference between legitimacy and legality? So legality is the government not caring about what you're doing, or at least being able to track you down if you're doing it wrong. Legitimacy means that someone else is going to be able to talk back to you. So, you have a lot of people that get a hack RF and they start experimenting with it, and they don't have anybody on the other side to talk to. And once you've got a ham radio license, someone else out there is like, hey, I can now chat with you. So this is about your peers being willing to talk back and knowing that you guys won't get busted with the FCC.
Then there's the education, training, and learning, kind of the same stuff, but it's people getting together to screw around with this crap. It's a community. It's a very strong community. Both on the ham end of things, with the older school style of talking to each other, and also on the new school SDR end of things. There's some very big communities there, and very open source, very sharing. So stay legit, and give back to the community and make sure you've got the tools that you need to do that, which is a license.
All right, so one of the things that we like to bring up because of our war driving background is the original DEF CON Wi-Fi shootout, and this is a great example of how the fundamentals of RF and what you learn when you get your amateur radio ticket can be directly applied to your SDR work. And so, as we've been chatting with Nick, and he asked us all these questions, we're like, man, you really need to take that, intro level tech ticket test, because all the questions that you keep asking us are right in there. Like, why does some RF not want to go into your feed line? And what, how can I best take care of this little amount of signal that I have from my SDR? So by learning what these guys did, you can push a signal quite far.
Yeah, this was back in the day, and they were using unamplified little PCMCAA Wi-Fi cards, and they got 125 miles, one card to another card, no amplification. You can see the antenna they had back there, so we'll get onto some of that a little bit, and it's knowing that how RF works and getting around limitations of not doing amplification, and in a lot of cases, there's better options than amplification.
All right, so the amateur radio guys do not like it when you call it CB. So just a little tip, like don't cruise in with your yellow vest and say, hey, I'm here to do CB. CB is the illegitimate stepchild of ham radio. That's the unlicensed portion of the band. So to get on the air, you need a license and you need to know the rules. And those are listed separately because it's not just about memorizing the test and going and taking the test. You can do that. By the way, all the answers that you will see on the test are published online, so you can go online to eHam and just memorize all the answers. But the reality here is that we're trying to learn, and you want to know what you're talking about once you get done with the test. So actually flip through the book. I highly recommend the one on Amazon. 1,000 people like it. Really good book. It's published by the ARRL. There's a link down here at the bottom. Go on there, click on there, get a book, read through it, and you'll be ready to take the test.
Yeah, for my technician license, I went through and I just crammed the answers. I kind of later regretted that, so then I went and actually studied for my general and extra, and I got a lot out of it. And it's one of the reasons I went and got my general and extra is just to have an excuse to go and learn. Your license is good for 10 years. I think we've already gone over the amateur-only aspect. Public encryption or public communications only, no encryption. This is all out there. Things can be encoded, but they can't be encrypted. If you want to do encryption and privacy, you have to get some other kind of license, some commercial license, which is probably going to be expensive and rather limited. This is out there for public domain type stuff, and don't encrypt. It's also transmission, not broadcast. TV out there, they're just cranking out a signal 24/7, 365. They don't know or care who's listening. They have a license to broadcast it, so they're just chugging away all the time. Hams, on the other hand, we're transmitting to somebody. We're part of a two-way communication. We are not legally authorized to go and just broadcast out to everywhere. We have to have communication going on in a bi-directional manner. 3 license types: technician, general, and extra. Technician is the entry one, easiest one. Get your technician, worry about the general and extra later. Especially for experimentation type stuff, they're not quite as useful. They get you access to some more bands, especially at the lower frequencies, for doing some real long range stuff, but we tend towards the shorter range stuff at higher frequencies.
Yeah, so if you guys have an HT, maybe like a Yaesu, someone was talking about, the newer bands that radios that you can get, little SDRs, the Baofangs that you can find on eBay. You can operate with one of those with just your tech license all day long. Once you want to get into something that's going to reach around the world, HF, you're going to want to get your general and extra. But a lot of people find that they're just fine with their tech license for the first couple of years until they get more interest and want to get on other bands.
Those little Baofangs, you can get into one for $30, $35. So pretty easy entry level. Radio basics here. Well, You start off with a transmitter here, microphone, dump it into amplifier, and it sends AC, alternating current, out to antenna, which jiggles the airways, and then airways jiggle over here, and comes down as AC on the other end. So it's pretty basic. I mean, at the core level, it's an AC, electromagnetic wave, back into AC. To go deeper on that, it can get a lot more complex. I mean, this is an SDR block diagram. And processing that, tuning to different frequencies gets really complex. But at the basic level, it's pretty simple. Back in the day, some of the early systems were just spark gap, where it would arc across a certain area, and that arc would cause the EM, electromagnetic wave, which would go out there. Not very tunable and kind of all over the place, so not really in use these days, but fundamentally it's just AC getting transformed from something on a wire going out over the air back into a wire. And seeing how it's alternating current, the receiver here, especially for your SDR, that's just a voltmeter. Oscilloscope is a voltmeter over time, and SDR is just another software-defined voltmeter that you can tune for different ranges.
All right, so when we talk about modulation, it can get kind of complex quick, but it's important to remember that these are all things that we use on a daily basis. So we've got your modulating signal, then and your data on the far left there, and then you're going to inject the carrier, and at that point you have a modulated signal. Now whether it's amplitude modulated or frequency modulated depends on whether you push AM or FM on your radio. So you guys all have experienced AM and FM on your radio. You know that FM, is where you listen to, music, and AM is where you listen to talk radio and things like that. They use those two different things for very specific reasons, and it's about how much you can cram into a band and how far those transmitters get. So the FCC is giving out different licenses based on how far those can go, and that's just like a cellular network. You've got all the cells stacked on top of each other. They're doing the same thing with the transmission nodes.
So yeah, here sine wave, and if we encode it as amplitude modulation, you can see it almost looks the same there, where you got the skinny spot on the low, fat spot on the high bit. If you encode it as FM, it messes with the frequency as a offset from your the base frequency.
All right, so one of the things you'll hear in ham radio is DC to daylight, and that's basically the manufacturers of the radio trying to talk about how much their radio will generally receive. You're not going to get to transmit DC to daylight, but most rigs will hear quite a bit. And the little RTL-SDRs, little $20 guys, they've got certain areas on this frequency spectrum that they can hear, and others where they can't. Yeah, right in there on VHF. The important thing that I think this diagram illustrates is that sound and light and harmful radiation are not that different from radio waves. So when we start to talk about the way antennas work, if you think about how light waves work in and out of a room, and then apply those, generally to what's going on with RF, it can help you model things. But there's a whole lot of things on this spectrum that we know and use all day long. Our radar bands are in there. 2.4 ISM is on there as well. So the same things same rules with physics apply to 2.4 that do to HF and VHF. They operate differently, but once you learn the fundamentals, it's pretty easy to go up and down the band and have things work.
And we've gotten the question before, what's sound doing on here? It's not electromagnetic. but it is a frequency. Something's happening at a specific interval, and that's just showing how, the frequency of sound that we hear relative to the RF spectrum frequencies we're talking about. So the lower you go, the bigger the wave, and the higher frequency, the shorter the wave. So up here we're talking about a wave that is 3 centimeters. So that's around your 5 gigahertz. So that's pretty small. And then when you start dealing with some of the AM broadcast stuff, and even lower, you're talking about waves that get to be miles long. Those have incredible penetrating power. They'll go through the earth, the oceans, but they're extremely slow. If you're trying to communicate something on a really, really slow frequency, you're talking bits per second if you're lucky. That's the type of stuff they use for submarines.
One of the interesting things to note here is that the reason why we're moving from 2.4 to 5 gig, and then we're going to go even higher for data, is because the higher you go in frequency, the more actual bandwidth you have. So when you go down to HF, those signals are so wide that one of those conversations in audio would just decimate our entire 2.4, band, as it were. So we're going to keep going higher, and you're going to have radios that go down to parts per million of accuracy before that will work. So down at HF, where everything started with spark gaps, you could use older, pretty basic electronic components to differentiate between one signal and another. But as we go up in frequency, we're going to have ICs that are much more sophisticated than we had in the past.
Yep, and also the higher the frequency, the easier it is to block. Stuff that's kind of down here, that's going to go through the walls no problem. This stuff up here, it might not make it out of the room. So with the cell system, they have to, as they go up in frequency, they have to cram more and more cells into a given area because they don't have the range, but it gives them more bandwidth. We're going to do our not Q-spectrum radar or Q-spectrum analyzer demo here. We're using GQRX instead because Q-spectrum pissed me off last night when it decided to die. Which gets into the experimentation aspect. A lot of these are open source tools. You'll have to dick around with the tools, find a tool that works, and it might not work for everything that you're trying to do. So I've got garage door opener here. A nice little tag that says 390 megahertz on there that I put on there, but it also has on the back FCC ID. Anybody want to take a wager on how you figure out what that exactly? Yep. Yes. Yep. The FCC website absolutely sucks. But the guys at Great Scott Gadgets, I think they've got FCC.io. You just type in FCC ID and whatever the hell this number is, and boom, it'll take you to the right page on the FCC webpage. It'll tell you the frequency this is operating at, and there will be stacks of PDFs on how all the data coming out of this is encoded. So, hit it, boom, you see data coming out.
So the really cool thing about those FCC PDFs is that in order for them to get licensed by the FCC to get that FCC ID, they have to publish all their testing data, which very often includes details on the chipset and what frequency it operates on. And so you can very quickly go from I don't know what this device is to now I know where to listen. So we didn't troll the airwaves looking for this. You can, but it's very very much easier to do a little bit of research off that FCC ID and then end up in just the right spot. The nice thing about this is that you can see what's going on the waterfall. So go ahead and press again there. And there's our audio. Alright, so you can tell we've got the difference between what you can hear and what you can see. And at this point, we can take the output from GQRX and input it into other programs and start decoding it. And this is using some sort of on-off key shift, and you can then pull up other pieces of software and actually do analysis on what the data is and then reverse engineer it. So that's kind of another entire talk, and there's some really cool software projects going on that are out on GitHub. But the ability to find where your device is and see the data starts to help you figure out, is this AM or FM or phase key shifting.
So,
yeah, so this is something that we learned while we were doing war driving, and it's something that's kind of not really well known, or I mean, you learn it doing ham radio, right? So we've got channels up there, and you guys are all familiar with 2.4. But what is a channel, right? Everyone's like, I'm going to be on channel 1, I'm going to be on channel 13. Channels are basically gentlemen's agreements that we're going to call this frequency a channel. It does not mean that you're not going to splatter over. And as you can see there, if you're on channel 1, you're going to be also talking on channel 2, 3, and just a little part of channel 4. So if you want to do a good job at war driving, you can essentially listen only on channel 1, channel 6, channel 11, and channel 14 if you can get your radio to do it.
Yeah, if you're listening right here, you're catching 1, 2, 3. So there is some overlap. So you don't necessarily need to listen on all 12 channels, but you get some overlap. And trying to exploit that can give you some distinct advantages. That's also why when you go in and put your access point on channel 2, when your neighbor's on channel 1, your Wi-Fi is going to stuck because you're sharing the bandwidth. I mean, if you put yours on 1, he puts his on 6, no overlap. But if you put it on anything in between, you're going to start stepping on each other's toes.
This is a great example of what we were talking about with bandwidth. So if you see at the bottom there, we've got the 22 list of how wide our signal is, and when we go up to 5 gig, none of those channels are overlapping with each other the way, well, not as bad, I should say, the way that we're having at 2.4. So we've got a lot more room to work at 5 gig, and we're not going to be stepping on each other's toes.
And everybody's heard about the super channels or whatever, where Linksys or whatever says, "Ooh, we're twice as fast as everybody else." Well, that's what's going on there. Instead of having 3 non-overlapping channels, all of a sudden there's 2 non-overlapping channels. So you just start eating up more and more of that bandwidth, bonding things together and just eating up more of the spectrum. If there's nobody around, that's fine. I mean, we live out in the middle of nowhere, and there's very minimal interference. You're sitting in an apartment here, and you try doing some of the channel bonding stuff and eating up more and more of the spectrum. You're just going to be stomping all over your neighbors, and your neighbors are going to be stomping all over you.
All right, so one of the things that we get lots of questions about is gain. And this is a real sticky question, because the question comes up as to whether or not we should use an antenna or an amplifier.
So, little laser pointer right here. This is 0.005 watts. As you can probably notice, it's actually brighter than that couple 100-watt projector in the back there. It all comes down to focus. If you focus a signal down, it'll travel farther. It'll be more coherent for a long ways. So, and it works on the receive end as well. If you tune out everybody else, all of a sudden that one signal that's way out there comes in a lot clearer. So, when people talk about gain, it's focus. If you are just trying to reach everybody in an area, a low gain antenna, it's like a light bulb. It'll light up the whole room, and that's great. But laser pointer, it'll reach out several rooms away. It'll go a lot further, but you don't want to try and use a laser pointer to run around in this room and try and find your car keys in the dark.
So every year we go to DEF CON, and Hack 5 sells those really cool, super tall antennas. And
we'll get to that.
Okay, yeah, we'll cover that in a bit. So signal to noise ratio. So this is the Kali quote here: "The quieter you are, the more you hear." And the difference between SNR is really, everyone's always like, SNR, I don't understand. But essentially, if you look at the signal and the noise floor, you can imagine that if the noise floor rises to a level at which it's too high for you to be able to hear the signal you're trying to receive, it goes away. So the SNR, very simply, is the difference between the received signal strength and the actual noise floor itself. And the lower your noise floor, the more you can hear, the better you can hear that signal. And the higher your noise floor, you can imagine you're going to hear it even worse.
The perfect example for this is the bar. I mean, head down to the bar, and a ton of people talking, and this whole noise floor, it's coming way up here. And at some point, the noise floor is going to be so loud that the person standing next to you, the signal you're looking for, you're not going to be able to get it. I mean, the noise is louder than the signal. And at that point, conversation stops because you can't understand what's going on. The answer there is to get the noise floor down or boost your signal. So either you end up screaming at each other or you get everybody else quiet down, or you go somewhere else.
This becomes super important when we start talking about amplification, because when you turn on an amplifier, you end up amplifying the noise as well. All right, so now we're going to talk about the omnidirectional antennas. Devin's got one in his hand here. And when you talk about the polarity, yeah. So you can imagine that thing is going to be right in the middle of the donut. Right there. And we've got different elevation patterns there, one for horizontal, one for vertical.
And this is a low gain antenna. It will sit here, and it's going to look something kind of sort of spherical, and it's going to have good coverage patterns in all directions. Who here has one of those high gain alpha antennas?
Yeah.
They're about 1.5 feet long. Well, over here, this is what it looks like. Instead of covering everything in every direction, it gets flattened out. You can see the 3D print, or 3D plot there. This one, it covers most everything. This one here, if there's an access point sitting right up there over our heads, well, there's no coverage up in that direction. So again, it comes back to gain and focus. If you are focusing in one particular direction, you're not going to be able to see in other directions as well. So yes, it is a high gain antenna, and in certain circumstances, it will give you a much stronger signal. In a lot of circumstances, it'll give you a lot weaker signal. So you just have to know the gain of the antenna, the pattern of the antenna, and what you're trying to do. Just match all of those up. If you want to do something funky, like take your high gain antenna and tilt it 45 degrees or something, yeah, you can get better signal in certain directions, but you have to work harder for that.
Yeah, so as you guys are using your antennas, if you can picture this donut radiating out around the antenna, then if you know where it is you're trying to reach, you can start to tip them a little bit better. Knowing what this model looks like can really help you optimize all that cool gear you bought that's not working right.
And then a Yagi antenna right there. It's got a even more unusual pattern here. And all the signal is going out in one direction there. There's always going to be weird side lobes. RF is weird. And you won't necessarily understand some of it for a good long time. But take a look at the antenna plot that you get with your antenna and figure out where it's focused. And this goes for transmit and receive. It's listening in this direction, and it's talking in this direction. So if you've got two directional antennas pointed at each other, you have to make sure that they're aligned correctly, so these plots here align up, and you'll get really good signal, and you won't be stomping on somebody else's toes that's sitting off down here, because all your energy is going straight out here and coming in that direction.
So this becomes really important when we talk about that noise floor and how you solve for that. It's not with an amplifier, it's with better ears. So you can imagine in Devin's bar example, if you were to put on one of those dog cones that you put on your dog when they go to the vet, put one of those on your head and point that at your friend in the bar, you're really going to be able to hear them because you're not listening to all the noise behind you. This antenna is the same way. By pointing all of your gain in one direction, you're not hearing behind you. And what you're not hearing is almost as important as what you suddenly are hearing better. So it's important that you understand how to get more gain without using an amplifier.
A few common antenna types here. Standard little vertical one. It's got a reasonably round plot here, and then it's kind of got a donut-shaped plot on the side. A dipole, similar. It's in a different plane, but gives a pretty good coverage. Yagi, here we showed the other plot there, and this is only going out in one direction. Dish antenna, you've seen those. Dish, hopper, whatever, all those satellites, and that's a very directed antenna type. There's a lot more antennas out there and a lot of derivations on antennas, but once you start figuring out a few of the basics, you can see how a lot of them can be tweaked for unique use cases.
So we mentioned Faraday cages earlier. If you when you go to Defcon, there's a guy there who's got a box on their table, and they're actually transmitting inside of a box. And the reason why you do that is because you're transmitting somewhere that you don't have a license to radiate. So if you're going to build one of those cell tower emulators and you want to test it out without the FCC coming down and busting you, the way to do that is with a Faraday cage. And the implication there of the electricity that's hitting the outside of the cage and not hitting the human is that if you're radiating inside of that cage, the electromagnetic waves are not making it out of the cage either. So, in the example of the microwave, you're radiating at 2.4 right there. That could and should, if you were to leave the door open, nuke your 2.4 Wi-Fi. It's the same frequency. They initially, when you had PCMCA cards, had a microwave resiliency setting in there that was designed to operate around leaky microwaves. Luckily, we've got better microwaves these days.
Interesting point. The microwaves run at 2.4 gigahertz, along with, they run at 2.4 gigahertz because water absorbs 2.4 gigahertz really well, and so that makes it easy to cook your food. Also means that water will attenuate your Wi-Fi signal. So people, trees, rain, that will heavily attenuate a 2.4 gigahertz signal a lot more than some other frequencies.
All right, so we talked a whole lot about the RTL-SDR. I think that's one of the original $20 models right here. I would highly recommend you guys get one of these. They're on Amazon.
These cheap ones here are 10 to 12 bucks. These really nice fancy ones are 20 to 25. Double the price? Maybe not worth it. I think so. It's 10 bucks. Come with some better antennas.
You get a better antenna, and they're more stable because they've got better cooling built onto them, and there's a little bit more shielding. So if you're going to buy, spend a little extra money. So you've got the $20 version, the Hack RF. Those are $240, something like that. Those are really great. The reason I like the Hack RF is because there's a huge community behind it. You can do everything from emulate a cell phone tower to all sorts of RF games. If you want to transmit, you need to jump up to the hack RF. So if you want to record something, you can do it with the RTL-SDR, but if you want to transmit back, you got to go up to hack RF.
Then there's also the Blade RF, a little bit more. It's got a little bit better sensitivity and some better range. And that's actually obsolete now because they've got the Blade Mini, which is better in all ways, as near as I can tell.
So one thing to watch out for when you go to buy one of these is to make sure that you're getting a unit that has really good receive properties and that actually receives in the frequency on which you want to operate. So the RTL-SDR is very wide band, but the receive properties are not as good as the Blade RF. At the same time, the Blade RF has great receive properties, but it doesn't receive in all the bands that the hack RF will. So you kind of have to cherry pick where it is you want to transmit. For example, if you want to transmit on 222 or somewhere around there, you're going to want to pick the hack RF. Even though the Blade RF will do a better job of listening, it won't go there without a transverter. So you really need to make sure that the SDR that you're picking is the right one for the job.
Okay, so we're going to do a demo here, and my wife actually sitting there has a transmitter that is transmitting some slow scan TV. It's just a Raspberry Pi with camera, and you could do it with a Pi Zero. So, and the antenna is just a jumper wire plugged into one of the GPIO slots, so pretty cheap. And by cheap, I mean it's also pretty horrible. If you look at the use of the spectrum, and it's pretty weak. So if you're not within 10, 15 feet, it might get a little bit flaky. We're gonna, what we've got set up here is just an Android tablet with a USB OTG cable, and then a RTL-SDR and an antenna. Kick off the SDR touch software. You have to fight the UI a bit. It can be quite a bit of a pain at times when things move when you don't want them to, and vice versa. Set it to FM. Go in and change the filter width to 60 hertz, so you're only listening to the little bit of spectrum that we want to. Set it to 14550. 144,550, so rather, and then tell it to start listening. And you got to make sure that when you if you're running it, you need to make sure you exit the app before you minimize it. Otherwise, it'll run in the background and just chew up your battery. And how do you know if it works? If it's a millennial, kind of sit there and nod. Listen to the old fart talk about walking uphill in the snow both ways and 9600 baud, and yes, it sounds exactly like a modem. So then we're going to do the Decode here, which is another app either on Android or your Fruit phone. Robot 36 is free, and it will do a nice decode. What we're doing is it's transmitting off that Raspberry Pi. RTL-SDR is decoding the RF and sending it out as audio. And then we are taking that audio off of one device and pumping it into another that is decoding the audio and turning it into slow scan TV. You can see the photo here. Some interference and things. We picked one where we were talking and things, which messes up some of that. And you get the decode. In this case, it's just a camera that takes a picture every 30, 60 seconds or something off that, and adds in the header with our call sign, because you need to transmit your call sign every 10 minutes at least, and away you go. So if we're going to stick the mic on this, so if anybody has the slow scan or SSTV slow scan TV installed on their phone or Robot 36, you can kick it open and hopefully won't get too much feedback, and your phone should be able to do the decode. I think afterwards we'll probably take the transmitter out there. If anybody has a RTL-SDR and wants to screw around a little bit, we can do that over the I Hack Charities booth or whatnot.
So I think the important thing about this demo is that you can tell we're not using boat anchor radios. We're not even using stuff that we had to buy at a store. We're using our open source software, or in the Android or iPhone case, something that you can buy relatively cheaply. And you're able to decode this without too much work. You got to do a little bobbling there to get it all to decode correctly. But once you find something using your RTL-SDR, if you want to start decoding it, it's pretty easy to do some basic signal identification on it, figure out what it is, and then download a program that's actually able to decode it. If we want to get really complex, you can do this on a PC, sure. But it's kind of fun to do cross-platform. At this point, we're talking from a Raspberry Pi into an Android device that's doing the decode from RF to AF, and then we're doing another program that's decoding the audio frequency into the actual image, and then you can see what's going on. So the transmitter's back there, the receiver's up here, and the decoder's up here as well, and we're not using any complex, amateur radio gear. It's all, common off the shelf, stuff you can use at home. I think it's my daughter's tablet, so.
Yep, and for more hacker points, these RTL-SDRs, they're a TV tuner. And one of the favorite things they do in some of the CTS is actually send out digital TV, and people just lose their minds because they don't know how to decode it. Despite the fact that you have a card that is designed to do exactly that. Everybody's busy abusing it for other things rather than what it's intended to. Video's coming out pretty black. I'm not sure where my wife is pointing the camera. Probably at the back of a chair or something. So a lot of static and things. The ISS, International Space Station, they are pumping out slow scan TV of video on the ground. Anybody can go with this setup right here. When it passes overhead, you can go out and get grab images off of satellites, International Space Station, and it's out there. Raspberry Pi, RTL, SDR, you can start decoding ATSB, the data being pumped out of all the airplanes as they fly over. You can start reading the information off of your the tire pressure sensors in your car. There's tons and tons of RF out there, and it's there for the taking, and with some pretty simplistic tools. So, any other questions or whatnot? Or
okay, we'll take questions off.